My name is Christopher Renstrom, and I'm your weekly horoscope columnist here on Astrology Hub. And this week, I wanted to talk to you about a very peculiar planetary configuration that's taking place in the sky. On January 22nd, we will have Venus conjoin Saturn in the zodiac sign of Aquarius for the last time, all right? But that also happens to coincide with Uranus coming out of retrograde in the zodiac sign of Taurus. Both of these celestial events will be taking place on the same day, which is January 22nd. So, what are we to make of this? Well, I think it's fascinating that Venus is conjoining Saturn in its own sign for the last time in what will probably be another 28 to 30 years. And on this particular day, Uranus, the planet of revolution and change, surprise upsets and unexpected turnarounds, will be coming out of retrograde in the zodiac sign of Taurus. Now, I know that I just said that, but I repeated it for a very distinct reason. Saturn is in the zodiac sign of Aquarius, and Venus is coming to conjoin Saturn in Aquarius. Saturn rules the zodiac sign of Aquarius. It's the traditional ruler of Aquarius, so it's sort of sovereign of the sign. Okay, so Venus, in essence, has to sort of genuflect to Saturn because Venus is in Saturn's sign, which is in Aquarius. But Uranus, who is the modern ruler of Aquarius. And actually, in the way that I work with astrology, I work with both Saturn and Uranus as the two co-rulers of the zodiac sign of Aquarius. Uranus is coming out of retrograde, which means that there's a change, a dramatic change taking place in its energy. And Uranus being in the sign of Taurus means that Uranus is Venus ruled. So what's fascinating about that is that although at first sight, Venus is coming together with Saturn in its own sign, and so we sort of assume that she has to genuflect or obey Saturn in the sign, she has basically Uranian energy in her back pocket because Venus being the ruler of Uranus and Taurus, and Uranus changing direction on that same day, this is going to introduce a wild card. This is going to introduce an unexpected twist. So again, what are we looking at? Well, we know that Venus is the sign of relationships. She rules over all betrothals, promises, and pledges that are made between two people, whether it's romantically or in the area of business. Okay, she's conjoining Saturn for the last time, but here we have this reversal, this reversal brought on by Uranus coming out of retrograde. So that begs the question, could this be an unexpected twist, as I just inferred, or could this be a turning of the tables, a reversal of the roles in some sort of way? And what does this mean? In astrology, when we see something like this, we will go back in time to basically, well, you go back in time with the targeted date. The time that I will travel back to by flipping through the pages of an ephemeris is to August 24th of the previous year, 2022. And I will see that when Uranus turned retrograde in Taurus on August 24th of the previous year, Venus happened to be in the zodiac sign of Leo. Now, why is this important? Well, if Venus is in Leo at that period of time, okay, and that we are revisiting her when Uranus comes out of retrograde on January 22nd, we see that Venus is in the zodiac sign of Aquarius. So Venus has essentially traveled 6 signs away to Aquarius, so that she's basically opposite where she began. This opposite, again, infers a kind of turning of the tables, a reversal of the roles that's taking place. And so it creates more interest. We want to look at this or examine this a bit more closely. When Venus, when Uranus turned retrograde on August 24th of 2022, and Venus was in Leo. Venus was actually approaching a square to Uranus at that time, which took place just a couple of days later. In fact, that was a very incendiary period of time. So this might affect people who were born under the zodiac signs of Taurus, Leo, and Aquarius. So if you have your sun, your moon, or your ascendant in Taurus, Leo, or Aquarius, this might be something that you want to pay special attention to. Okay, so following that retrograde, which began on August 24th, was a square to Uranus between Venus and in Uranus. And what that might have indicated there is a rupture of some sort. There might have been a rupture, a fight, a split, something in which you and the other person broke up or split apart or went your separate ways as a result of this incident. Okay, so this is something that's coming up again to be addressed or readdressed on this January 22nd. So that got me thinking, what would be a good example of something like this? What would be a good example of a sort of a rupture or a split, turning of the tables? What could be something that would exemplify this planetary energy that we're talking about this week? And so something that immediately came to mind is one of my favorite operas. It also happens to be one of my favorite ballets, and it is the story of Eugene Onegin. Eugene Onegin was written by a man of African descent in Russia. He was Black, and he wrote this very famous novel called Eugene Onegin. And it is basically the story of a nobleman who goes to the country and is entertained by his best friend Lenski, and he meets this younger woman named Tatiana. Basically, to sort of get your idea about what Eugene Onegin is essentially the story of Pride and Prejudice. It's the story of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice gone terribly wrong. Okay, and this is where the Saturnian element comes into play. So Eugene Onegin is basically, this takes place in the 19th century. Eugene Onegin is basically what would be referred to in Europe at the time as a dandy. He's of noble birth, not royal birth, but of noble birth. And he comes from a tremendous amount of money, which is made from serfs who work the land of his family. And basically, this has bankrolled Eugene Onegin's stay in like Moscow or some sort of like major city where he's a man of cultural interests and affairs. He doesn't work a job, but he shows up at dinner parties and things like this, and he has witty conversation. And, you know, of course, he's strikingly beautiful. The protagonists always are in stories like this. You know, he's strikingly beautiful, and he also has an air of sweet condescension. Sweet condescension is a phrase that's often used in 19th century literature. It's one of my favorite phrases that's used in 19th century literature. Sweet condescension basically describes an austere gentleman who sort of condescends to have a conversation with ladies, exhibiting both his superior intellect and his tolerance of their company, you know. So lots of times in novels like this, women will say, he spoke to me with sweet condescension. Okay, they're just so happy that he spoke to them, and they're so, you know, moved by his worldliness and the way that he looks down on them. That makes him even more attractive. Okay, so Eugene Onegin, for some sort of reason, goes and visits his friend Lenski in the country. And Lenski, it's basically the Hamptons. Okay, so he goes and basically visits his friend Lenski in the country, which is basically just sort of Hamptons in New York. Okay, and so and it's in the summer, and there's really not a lot to do, just like the Hamptons. And so what you do is that you start dropping in other people's houses. Okay, and that's what Lenski does. Lenski's like, well, actually, Eugene, I want you to come and meet my fiancée, Olga. She lives at the country estate next door. Okay, so Olga lives at the country estate next door. And Olga, is very, very happy to see Lenski, and she's very happy to see Eugene Onegin, and she even invites them on in. And they're in the middle of playing a game, Olga and her friends. They're in the middle of playing a game, which is that if you look into a mirror and if you see someone in the mirror, that's the person you're supposed to marry. I don't know, some sort of like lame superstitious game. But anyway, they're playing this game. And actually, in the game, Olga's looking at herself in the mirror. And that's when Lenski shows up to say hi. And she sees him in the mirror and she turns around and she says to her friends, see, that's him. That's the man I meant to marry. And all the ladies are like, oh, how exciting. This is so like wonderful. And at that point, Olga says, now I want you to meet my older sister, Tatiana. Where's Tatiana? Okay. Now, Tatiana is the older sister of Olga, and she's very book read. She's very book smart. She's not as pretty and charming as Olga. She's actually much more intellectual. But that has a charm of its own way. She's, I think, at this time only 18 or 19 in the story, and she doesn't like to fraternize with other people. She prefers the company of books and things like this. And at this point where they're having this conversation, Tatiana has been beseeched to come and sit in front of the mirror. This is the game that they're playing, and she sits in front of the mirror and she, looks at herself and she's kind of like, okay, like maybe I'm not looking my best today or whatever. And at that point, Eugene Onegin peers over her shoulder and looks at her in the mirror. And she's completely startled. Okay, she wasn't expecting such a striking gentleman to suddenly appear out of nowhere in a mirror, and especially when she's not looking that great that particular day. So conversation ensues, like it always does in situations like this. And so she's immediately impressed with his superior intellect as he goes into his sweet condescension phase. Eugene Onegin, shows everyone that he's sweetly condescending and he's very, very worldly and he's very, all these sorts of things. Nevertheless, Tatiana has been reading certain authors that are of interest to him, and Onegin immediately is impressed that Tatiana is not at all like the other friends of Olga's, that she's very much the older sister, and they get into a conversation about books. And so she's sharing, the different books that she's reading and things like this, and they go on this walk. She's sharing all these different books and things like that she's reading and that she's really looking forward to so-and-so's next book, and he's basically saying, you know what, he's actually kind of like a pretentious writer. Who you really want to look at is this person, and this person is of interest, or that's a really fascinating take, Tatiana, that you took on that. That's not exactly the way I would have seen it, or people in society would have seen it, but that's kind of a fascinating take nevertheless. So what's happening is that Onegin, despite his airs of superiority and being older than Olga by a few years, is nevertheless impressed with her lively intellect and with the way that she carries on conversation. And he's actually really kind of like, wow, there's something to this girl. Tatiana, who's been nothing but book read this entire time, living on her country estate, is swooning almost over him. And the question is she really swooning over him, or is she really swooning over the books that he's read? But she has also found an intellectual companion in the company of Onegin. So here we have a very Saturn and Aquarius setup. Okay, once again, we're in the upper echelons of society. We're talking about a romance, which is kind of like, we're not really quite sure if it's a romance at this point. It's definitely a meeting of the minds. And two people that are very much enjoying one another's company. Tatiana is very much the Venus in the equation. She hasn't really given men a thought at all, but she's taken by this one who shows an interest of books, and so her mind is enlivened in his company, and she's enjoying it quite a bit. And Onegin, who looks down on everyone, he's very Saturnine. He's very removed. He's well dressed, well coiffed, very removed, very superior. Nevertheless, is beginning to recognize that this is someone of great interest, and that this might even be someone who might be his equal. So his interest is definitely piqued Okay. Now, what happens is that everyone, celebrates or has a dinner or something like that, and they go to bed and things like this. And Tatiana is very much moved by Onegin, and she writes him. She writes him a love letter. Okay, it's a love letter. She's possessed of these feelings. She's feeling this romance, this love. She doesn't even know what these feelings are, and she writes all of this in the letter. And so she writes a love letter, which is kind of a strange composite of, kind of a Kierkegaardian, admission of love and celebration of the meeting of intellects and grand ideas and things like this, and of an 18 or 19-year-old girl who really is overrun by emotion and doesn't really know what to say, and has realized that she really has feelings and attachments for him. And does he feel the same way? Of course, that's always the thing that we ask in these love letters. Does Onegin feel the same way about Tatiana that Tatiana feels about Onegin? And she writes this love letter and she folds it up and she calls for her nurse. Everyone has a nurse. So the nurse comes on in the morning, and she says, take this to that gentleman named Onegin. And the nurse is like, not sure, but she does, and Tatiana can't wait to see him again as soon as possible. Well, it so happens to be that the next time that she sees him is on her naming day. A naming day is like a birthday in Russia, but it's not the same. I think it's actually about the christening or when you're baptized, because they were never really quite sure about the birthday. So it's when you're baptized. And she's having a naming day, and all sorts of people have come to her country estate to celebrate it. It's a party. It's like any one of those parties out of a Jane Austen novel. Everyone's come to celebrate her naming day, and it's to celebrate Tatiana, but it's to really fraternize and visit with one another and things like this. And so Onegin enters, and everyone is, taken by the striking figure of the man, as he enters, and they're all like full of gossip and things like this. And Tatiana, her heart goes up into her throat, as she sees him, and she's like, and she doesn't know whether to run to him and ask him if he's read the letter, or to like sort of disappear into the background to sort of see, if he shows any sign that she exists or anything like this. And so Onegin comes over to her, and he, goes to speak as if to, and she's like, yes, but different guests involve, and they say hello to Tatiana, and there's people that she needs to meet, and so they're interrupted. And during this period of time, the second guest arrives. The second guest arrives at Tatiana's naming day party, and this guest is a prince. I don't know if he's direct line, to the king or czar or anything like that, but he's a prince. He's a prince, and he has summer lands, and he definitely outflanks Onegin, and he's in his uniform, and he's in his princely attire and things like this. And he's been invited by Tatiana's mother. And in fact, Tatiana's mother has made arrangements for Tatiana and the prince to meet, because she sees them as an eligible match for marriage. And so the prince has shown up with this in mind, and he's talking to the different people and things like this, and because they all owe tithings or whatever to him, because he's the big landlord over all these country estates. But anyway, he's and he meets Tatiana's eye, and he is immediately enamored with her. He's like, not head over heels in love, but he's like, you're so very charming, and things like that. He likes what he sees. Okay, he likes what he sees. Okay, and when you're dealing with arranged marriages, you don't always like what you see, but in this case, the prince happens to like what he sees, and he likes what he sees in Tatiana quite a bit. But Tatiana, I mean, please, right? We have to Tatiana doesn't even give the prince the time of day. She's too busy, like, looking over, the heads of the guests and things like that, to try to catch Eugene Onegin's eye, because she's written this letter, and this is the first time that she's seen him since he's read the letter. So finally, guests leave, and maybe to go and walk on the grounds, or to admire the peasants working the land, or something like this, whatever people do. So Tatiana and Onegin are left alone for an instant with one another. And in that instant, we have the reverse. We have the reverse letter scene that takes place in Pride and Prejudice, okay? Here we have in Onegin, the reverse letter scene. And what he does is he takes out the letter, and she, asks, did you like the letter? Did you like what he read, what you read? What are your, I mean, she doesn't quite ask, what are your feelings? Because that's too much, but, did he receive the letter? Yes, he received the letter. He's taking it out of his breast pocket. What do you think of it? He opens it up and he begins to critique the letter line by line. He critiques the word placement, the grammar. He begins to question what her intent was by putting these different philosophical ideas together. And is she aware that her premise was faulty and that this is a very bad usage of this verb in this particular place? I mean, it's agonizing. It's awful. It's like the last thing that you want to be hearing. And you just see the color drain from her face. You just see her she's 18, she's 19, she's a budding intellectual. She's falling in love for the first time. Onegin's probably a good 7 years older than her. He's been around the block. He didn't have to do this, but he's doing it because he's reprimanding a foolish young girl for, so he goes on and on and on. And Tatiana, understandably, begins to cry, and people are beginning to, emerge again or whatever. And in order to stop her from crying, that people are going to be returning to this party, and clearly she hasn't been getting the message, or he takes the letter and he puts it in her hands, and she takes the hands and she opens up the letter and begins to cry again. And he takes the letter out of her hands and then from behind her rips it up into pieces and dumps it on the floor. Okay. And that's when she just absolutely loses it. Okay. And he can't be bothered anymore with this like silly girl who's infatuated with him. And he goes and takes out cards and begins playing on a table, somewhere else. And she and a friend sees Tatiana and she escorts her, and people reemerge and things like this. And they begin a dance. Okay. Because this is what you do in a ballet. This is what you do in an opera. This is what you do in a social occasion. You begin to dance, and different people begin to dance with one another and things like that. And Tatiana really is not interested in dancing at this point. And she retires to a chair in the corner, and the prince comes in, and he's kind of like looking around for her, and so at this point, Onegin is furious. He's playing solitaire by himself or whatever in the corner, and he spots Olga. He spots Olga with Lenski. Olga, if you remember, is Tatiana's younger sister, and Lenski is her fiance. And he begins to flirt with Olga outrageously. He asks Olga for a dance. They dance. He whips her around the room. As he's dancing with Olga, he's looking over at Tatiana. I mean, he's really rubbing it in, okay? And so, but Olga's like silly and frivolous, and she's like, oh, I'm having a silly and frivolous time and things like this. And they finish dancing, and he goes back to his card game, and he's like, oh, do you know how to play cards? And Olga's like, no. She's lying. She knows how to play cards, but she's like, no, I don't, so he's like, come on over here and I'll show you how to play, blackjack or something like this. And she's like giggling, and Lenski's like, what's going on here? So Lenski comes over and he says, Olga, will you dance or something like that? And she says, no, I'm having too much fun playing cards. And Lenski sort of like goes and disappears in the background, and he circles around, and he's like, Olga, will you dance? And at that point, she's like won a couple of times in the card game, and she's laughing, and she's Eugene Onegin is flattering her and making her feel better and better and better. And she's overflowing with, who wouldn't? It's a fabulous moment. You're being complimented by one of the most dashing men in the room, and now she's going to play, keep away with her fiance. It's like, it's an intrigue. It's an intrigue. She's going to play keep away with her fiance and make him like a little bit jealous, and isn't that fun? And so Lenski asks her to dance, and she dances with him, but Eugene Onegin comes in between them and takes Olga away and starts dancing with her. And she's like, see Lenski. And so things get out of hand. Okay, Lenski has been humiliated. He at first was really quite patient and indulgent of the whole thing, but now Onegin has gone overboard. He's outwardly cavorting with Onegin is outwardly cavorting with Lenski's fiance Olga, who's Tatiana's younger sister. This is nightmarish for Tatiana. She's watching the whole thing and just becoming more and more furious. And so Lenski, losing his temper, takes out his glove and snaps it across Onegin's face in front of everyone. He throws the glove to the ground and he challenges him to a duel. Okay, this stops the party in its tracks. Everyone backs away. Even the prince is like, And so at that point, Onegin says, this is not a big deal or whatever, take it back, and the party goes on and things like that. And Tatiana's mother, Olga's mother, very quickly comes in and takes the prince out of the room. It's like she can tell something's up, and she's like, let's go and look at the topiary, or something like that. So she escorts the prince out of the room with, and then she sends the nurse over to investigate what's going on and break this on up and things along these lines. But Lenski's not letting go of it. Okay. And people who've begun to leave are coming back in, and he berates Onegin. Onegin goes on and on about the silliness of these country folk, and you can't take them seriously. And Lenski's like, but that is my fiance Olga. I take it very seriously. And it's like, well, I can't help it if you're, drawn to one of these lesser folk or something like that. So he insults Olga. And so Lenski picks up the glove and he snaps it again, across Onegin's face. And he's like, tomorrow at dawn, a duel, you and me. Okay. And Onegin has no choice but to say yes. And Tatiana watches the entire thing completely like I don't know who you are. I don't know what to say to you. And so that is the end, of that particular chapter, that particular act. It's very exciting. And so the following morning, there's the duel. It's the first thing at dawn, and duels were illegal. In I think they start in France, and by this time in the 19th century, they're very much illegal. And so, but it involves two guns that are taken by two, usually gentlemen, and they walk in opposite directions, turn around, and they fire at one another. And if you saw Hamilton, it's Hamilton and Burr. Okay, you know how that winds up. Okay, and basically a similar thing winds up here as well. Eugene Onegin is a sharpshooter, of course, and he shoots and kills Lenski on the spot, and Lenski drops dead. And at this moment, Olga and Tatiana, who had come to try to plead Lenski to walk away, and Lenski refused. They've been these inadvertent witnesses to this duel. And so Lenski, who really is Onegin's, one of Onegin's best friends, because it's one of his friends that can put up with the ego, he's dead on the ground. Olga is completely, weeping and crying, insanely over her fiance's dead body. Onegin, for the first time, begins to register what has taken place, that he's killed his best friend. Well, that was the intent of the duel. He knew that, but at the same time, exactly what he's done, and he turns to Tatiana, and Tatiana in that moment just meets his gaze and just shakes her head quietly. There are no words for it. No words at all. And Onegin, horrified by everything, turns around and leaves. He leaves the estate. He leaves this part of Russia, and he goes abroad. He goes to France. He goes to England. He goes to all these places where he tries to lose himself in other women and their charms and dinner parties and things like this. But he cannot escape. He cannot escape the guilt that he feels at the death of his best friend Lenski. So years pass, probably about 3 years, maybe about 5 years pass. Let's say 5 years pass, a number of years pass, and Onegin has been traveling abroad, and he comes back to Russia, and he is invited by the prince okay, who we had seen before. And he's invited by the prince to a ball. And it's a wonderful moment at the opera. I mean, because you see, the dead body of Lenski and the sun rise over it with the music playing, and then it changes, and then all of a sudden there's a ball, and it's years later. And so it's years later, and Onegin has been invited by the prince to a ball. And he comes to this ball, and Onegin looks much older, and he looks like a broken man. I mean, he's still a man of means, and he's still well-to-do. He'll never run out of money. He's a trust fund baby. He's still all of those things, but there's a haunted look to his eye, and so he attends his friend, the prince's ball, and of course the ladies are like, oh, sweet condescension. Okay, so they're gathered around him and things like this, and he's easily bored and has nothing to do with them or anything along these lines. And at that point, the music changes because the prince is, basically wants the music to change in the ball to announce the appearance of his wife. Okay. And so his wife, who's known as an incredibly gracious woman, a generous woman, a very educated woman, is about to appear at the ball. And so all the ladies are like, oh, it's the wife and things like this. And maybe we'll catch her glance and things like this, because she's like, the plume de la plume of society as the prince's wife. And of course, as you can imagine, it's Tatiana. It's Tatiana. The prince had indeed married Tatiana after the duel. The two of them had gotten together, and Tatiana is actually happily married to him and very, very happy with him. And her station has become elevated. She's free to read all the books that she wants to read. She actually can meet with the authors of the books that she reads in the prince's court, and she's a patroness of them, a sponsor. And she's very, very happy with the way that things are. And so she's at this ball, and she's greeting the guests and things like, she's got a tiara and jewels. Okay, they always have tiara and jewels. It's fabulous. Okay, and she's greeting all the guests and things like this. And then one of the people in line is Eugene Onegin. And they lock eyes, and he does not look away. And she does, and she looks again across the room, and he's still looking for her. He's looking to match her gaze, and she exits very quickly. During this period of time that she exits, Eugene Onegin has to see her. She's desperate to see her. He's full of all these feelings. It was Tatiana all along. That's the person he was in love with all along. He's full of all these feelings. Tatiana, if he could only have Tatiana's forgiveness, then he would put to rest his guilty conscience. He has to see her. He has to make love to her. He has to run away with her. Tatiana has to be his wife. He's going to spirit her away from the prince, this dull and bourgeois wedding, marriage or whatever, and they're going to live together. And he's going to pour all of his riches and share all of his intellectual treasures with her and tell her of his experiences and all these sorts of things. So what does Onegin do? He sits down and he writes a letter. He writes a letter to Tatiana. He writes a letter in which he pours out all of his feelings. It was you all along. I was in love with you all along. I was a fool. I was an idiot. I didn't understand these feelings. I was proud. I was vain. I was ridiculous. Will you meet with me? Will you deign to meet with me in private quarters so I can tell you these feelings myself? Please, please don't refuse me. Don't refuse this letter. I need to see you. So this happens to coincide with the fact that on the following day or three, the prince is called away to go and inspect army troops, or whatever princes do. They never fight the actual battles, but they go and somehow inspect the army troops. And so he's preparing to go and inspect the army troops, and Tatiana is a little bit skittish with him. And she says, I hope you won't be away that long. I miss you. And he's kind of like, Tatiana, I go and inspect the troops at this time, every year. Like, why are you, so troubled. Why, what is it about you? Why are you so nervous? Why are you so troubled? And she's like, oh, it's nothing. It's nothing. It's just, I hope you come back soon, and he's like, I will. I always do, my dear. I love you, and he kisses her and he leaves. And she goes into the rooms where she has agreed to meet Onegin. And Onegin comes bursting through the doors. I mean, it's like right out of a romantic novel. He comes bursting through the doors, and he has to see her. And of course, he's asked her if she has read his letter. And she's like, yes, 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 I've read your letter. And he immediately goes down on a knee, and he kisses her hand, and he wants to make love to her, and he wants to run away with her. And at first she responds. She can't help it. This is her first love. This is the man that she first fell in love with. And so he takes his and he kisses her, and she embraces him. And she is just, she embraces him, and just her heart just falls into his, and he's clinging to her with all the desperation of a lost soul that's being rescued, of a love that's about to be redeemed, of the way it should have been all along, and they're caught up in one another's embraces and kisses and caresses. And it's at that moment, in the midst of it, that she pulls herself away, and he pleads with her or whatever, and she says, yes, but she pulls herself away again, and he pleads with her, no, don't pull yourself away, come to me, come closer to me. And finally she pulls herself away from him a third time, and she goes to the desk, her writing desk, and she takes his letter, and she shows it to him, and he's like, like this, and she rips that letter to pieces in front of him, and she throws it down on the floor. And in case he had any sort of mistake, she goes and she rings the bell for the servant to enter. And so the servant's about to enter, and she's like, leave me, and he has no choice, but he runs out the door, past the servant, crying into the street. And she hears his sobs as they go through the house, and she hears it from the street below, and she holds himself fast. And it's at that moment, of course, that she falls to her knees, crying out. And of course, that's the end. That's the end of the opera. That's the end of the ballet. That's the end, because it's just so fabulous. So what do we have here? We have the opposite side. We have, as I said, Pride and Prejudice gone terribly wrong, horribly wrong. But it is still Saturnian. It is still Saturnian. Now, at first glance, one might say, well, it's Saturnian because it denies the love, between the two people. And so it's this kind of like, the fact that they were never really on the same page. And this plays out through the action of the drama, that this is the denial. This is the heartbreak. That is Saturn conjunct Venus. But no, it does so much more than that. What Saturn does is that Saturn reveals what's in the heart. Saturn reveals what's in the heart, and what was in the heart all along, did Tatiana really know what love was at the age of 18? It's the first person, she falls in love with, someone who sweeps her off her feet, and there's this intellectual rapport. Was there true emotion, or was there intellectual rapport? Something where they really did enjoy one another's company, and so she was taken away with it, and she confesses her feelings. How much in love with her was Onegin by going and ripping up her love letter, at the on her name day dance ball festival. Now he could say he was doing that for her own good, that she was a silly little girl, and she needed to understand, not to wear your heart on the sleeve or something like that. But what propelled Onegin to flirt with Olga? What propelled Onegin to humiliate Lenski at that dance, I mean, it's pretty clear. What propelled him was the fact that he did have feelings. You know, whether he had feelings for Tatiana or not, his feelings had been aroused. And so he was doing a Saturnian repression thing. He was repressing those feelings or redirecting them by humiliating her and showing her this is what comes of love. You know, you get embarrassed, you get cheated on, you get betrayed, you get your heart broken. You know, so he's taken that sort of like critique of the letter and the tearing it up to an extreme of humiliating Tatiana. Not that anyone else knows, because no one else knows about the letter, but humiliating her in front of her own face. You know, what he does is so cruel. It's overly cruel, but is he doing it to teach her a lesson, or is he doing it to repress his own feelings that he had had inside? And of course, this culminates in the duel, and that makes the whole thing, you know, impossible. That's what turns him into the worst thing ever, that he would, you know, that he's going to go and betray another friend of his, the prince, by running off with the wife. But again, you know, is it the true feelings that he had had for her all along? Or is it the fact that he has been this lost soul and only her love, only her redemption can save him? Or is it, you know, if he does succeed in making her run away from her husband, the prince, and turning it into a scandal, has he shamed her as much as himself? And now he has a compatriot, you know, someone to commiserate in the shame, where they would both be ostracized socially or along those lines. So there's a lot of Saturn that's going on here. And of course, our first response when we see this Saturnian influence is to say, oh, there's Saturn spoiling it again, you know, or driving people to despair or ruining whatever relationships. We must always remember with Saturn, Saturn is a teacher. Okay. And so what Saturn does is basically reveal over time what has taken place. Saturn doesn't expose in a sudden way, like, you know, I'm exposing you for the cad you are. You know, Saturn doesn't expose in a sudden way. Saturn reveals over a period of time. I mean, Saturn is named after the god of time. It is the planet of time. And we're all familiar with that phrase, that truth is the daughter of time. And so time has passed. And so when he comes back to her again, you know, she is immediately transported back in time to the 18-year-old girl who had originally fallen in love with him, and is realizing in his smells and his perfumes and in his embraces who he is. But then she also remembers who he is, you know, and she recognizes what's going on here, and she makes the right choice. You know, a lot of times it's been interpreted as she stands by her husband and this is what, no, she makes the right choice for herself, which is to rip out, you know, that love, that passion that she had felt, to tear up the letter, to do to him what he had done to her, not out of retribution, but to bring the whole thing to an end, to exorcise that ghost. And she sends him away. And in sending him away, she also breaks her heart again. And that's what makes it so beautifully Saturnian, because the truth all along is that they were never a good match. Okay. And although they had areas where they connected, that's not that they weren't really meant to be. You know, they had this entire history, this entire relationship in a non-relationship, and that's defined by the death of her sister's fiance. So I'm not saying it's like, okay, where are we going with all of this? I'm not saying that you're going to have this same moment on January 22nd. But what I am saying is that there's going to be some kind of reprise. There's going to be some kind of return to the events that took place in late August of 2022. Maybe this had to deal with someone romantically. Maybe this had to deal with someone in business, you know, but certainly someone in which there was a sense of loyalty. Maybe it's a sense, it's a close friend, and there was a feeling of a betrayal or a rupture that took place. What you're going to find with Uranus coming out of retrograde, on the same day that Saturn conjoins Venus for the last time in Aquarius, what you're going to find is the truth. Truth is the daughter of time, the truth revealed. And what you will, maybe you come into contact with this person again, maybe you hear word, news of this person, maybe somehow there's a discovery of information that hadn't been known before. And you might ask yourself, did you move on too soon, only to discover that there was more to the story between the two of you, that you might have acted prematurely in breaking it off with someone, or that person might have realized that they had acted too prematurely, and that this person comes to you maybe with their heart on the sleeve with an apology, but you've moved on to another relationship or alliance, and so it's too late. There's nothing you can do to change that. So Uranus, in coming out of retrograde, can have that reveal. The planet of revolution and change is also the planet of revelation and enlightenment. So there can be a reveal element to Uranus coming out of retrograde. So that might be something that's revealed, and there might be like, oh dear, did I make a terrible mistake? Did I act before I should have? Or do you realize on January 22nd that moving on was the absolutely right thing to do, and that you're having a thank God I dodged that bullet moment? So whether it's one or the other, there's definitely a moment of truth to be experienced, and that moment of truth will be experienced on January 22nd.
After what's been going on for the past few years, you need to start making some wise financial decisions. If you're feeling lost and don't know where to start, we got some quick tips from an expert for you. Let's hear what financial astrologer Mitchell Scott Lewis has to say.
2023 is a particularly volatile year with 3 of the major planets changing signs. People want to know, what can I do to improve my financial world? What can I do to improve my retirement fund? Believe me, I made money. I knew nothing about Wall Street, commodities, or anything else. And because of astrology, my very first trade found the top of the cotton market. And I made thousands of dollars within 2 weeks of going on the floor. What I hope people get out of this webinar is some useful tools. By the end of the series, I would like people to have a good indication of how astrology works in the financial markets, a usable concept about how they can go about making trades and investments for themselves. And I believe that astrology will allow you to do that.
So, are you feeling inspired to make 2023 the year of your financial transformation? Just head to astrologyhub.com/outlook to start making some wise financial moves right now. Mitch has been helping his clients for over 30 years, so you can rest assured you'll be in good hands. Again, it's astrologyhub.com/outlook, and I hope to see you there.
Thanks for tuning in to the Astrology Hub Podcast Network. If you love the show, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, review, and share it. And if you don't know how to do that, here's how you can leave a review in Apple Podcasts on iPhone. Make sure you're on the landing page for the Astrology Hub podcast and not an individual episode. Scroll down to the bottom until you reach ratings and reviews. Click one of the 5 stars under Tap to Rate to leave a rating, and under the most recent review, tap the Write a Review button. And if you're on another device, just find out how to leave a review on whatever podcast player you use. Then, share what you love about the show or how it helps you navigate your life. We'd love to hear your stories. And by doing this, you make it possible to make shows like Horoscope Highlights happen every week. Thank you again for tuning in, for being a part of our community, and for making astrology a part of your life.